Okay, truth number 16. Temptation is a winnable battle. In 1982, I went through a horrific 6-hour ordeal where I experienced a taste of the horrible mental anguish of hell. I don't have words to describe what that experience did to me. I was an arrogant, violent cop, full of pride, full of perversion, full of myself. I was miserable and angry. Then I had a run-in with the Almighty that devastated me and humbled me before the Lord. After going through that grueling experience, I could not imagine ever returning to my sexual sin. Yet 3 weeks later, I was sitting in my apartment one morning and the old sexual temptations once again overcame me. And once again, I allowed myself to be led off into sin without so much as an argument. It was the same old sexual trance that left me feeling powerless to stop myself. One day not long after that, I read 1 Corinthians 10:13. No temptation has overtaken you but such as is common to man. And God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you're able, but with the temptation will provide the way of escape also, so that you'll be able to endure it. This verse really stumbled me because it didn't seem to line up with my experience. Where was the way of escape for me that day? Where was the strength to say no to that powerful temptation? And once I caved into that temptation, why did I feel so utterly impotent to stand up against those that followed? It was years later that I came to understand that to see the truth of this verse, you must read it in its context. That begins at the end of chapter 9. Paul said, "Do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but only one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may win. Everyone who competes in the games exercises self-control in all things." He went on to say, "I discipline my body and make it my slave so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified." Paul was describing to these Corinthian Christians the disciplined life he led. He was letting them know that even he could be destroyed if he didn't maintain control over his carnal nature. The word disqualified he used here is the same word he employed in Romans 1:28 when he talked about God giving sexual sinners over to a reprobate mind. As he opened chapter 10, he used the children of Israel in the wilderness as an example of disobedience and unbelief. In verse 6 he said, "Now these things happened as examples for us, so that we would not crave evil things as they also craved." Then in verse 8 he said, "Nor let us act immorally as some of them did, and 23,000 fell in one day." He wrapped up this line of thought in verse 12 where he said, "Therefore, let him who thinks he stands take heed that he does not fall." When you look at the whole context here, there's no other possible way to understand it than to say that this is a sober warning to be very careful about the way we live our lives. If Paul were to condense this whole passage down into a simple sentence, I think it'd sound something like this. I live a very disciplined life because I don't want to end up like those Israelites who, in spite of all their spiritual privileges, were destroyed because they gave over to sexual sin and idolatry. And that shows the difference between Paul's life and my life in 1982. I had not yet learned the importance of living a disciplined life. You see, you don't prepare to face temptation at the moment of attack. You prepare for it in your daily life. A good illustration of this would be boxing. When I was young, I spent some time working out at a local boxing gym. There was also a professional fighter who trained in that gym. Of course, he fought for a living and was far better at it than I was, but I remember having the sense that he didn't seem to train all that hard. One night, I went to see him box at the Memorial Auditorium. I was excited to see him in action, but it turned out to be a pretty disappointing night. His opponent sensed his weakness and went right after him, knocking him out in the first round. Why did he lose that fight? Because he was undisciplined and sloppy in his training. Listen, skill alone won't win a fight. A good boxer knows that if he can't conquer himself in the gym, he will never overcome his opponent in the ring. The loafer runs 2 miles rather than 10. He quits his workout when he gets tired. He picks sparring partners who aren't a challenge. The fighter who has gotten into the habit of going the easy route has trained himself to be a loser. No matter how skilled he might be, when he gets into that ring, his lack of discipline and his unwillingness to be hard on himself is going to become evident to all. You could say that the reason I caved into that temptation in 1982 was because I had not yet learned to do my road work. And when you think about sexual addiction, you could really say that it's nothing more than a string of lost fights with temptation. A man is tempted to indulge in some form of sexual sin and he gives in to it. Then he's tempted again and gives in again. And on it goes, one defeat after another. Through my repeated failures, I had developed a defeatist attitude. I was in the habit of giving up as soon as the temptation presented itself. That fatalistic attitude wasn't going to change until my thinking changed. And my thinking couldn't change until I knew what it meant to spend quality time with the Lord every day. Finally, in late 1984, I started praying and spending time in the Word every morning. What followed were several months of freedom. Then in May 1985, the enemy caught me at a weak moment and I caved into a temptation to visit a prostitute in a massage parlor. But I was so disgusted by that experience that I never committed adultery again after that. I didn't realize it at the time, but my devotional life had made it possible to develop a lifestyle of victory. My failure in that massage parlor turned out to be an anomaly to this new way of life. It wasn't until later that I made the connection between my newly found freedom and my growing relationship with the Lord. Listen, temptations are as much a part of the Christian life as going to church. In fact, they're a necessary element to our probationary time on earth. This world is a testing ground to see if we will choose to live for God or for self. If you want to win the battle with temptation, get on your knees before God, commit yourself to establishing the disciplines of a godly life, and ask Him to sustain you in times of weakness. And before you know it, the old life of defeat will be behind you, and you will begin living the life God meant for you to live.